But of course, if you happen to be on the side of the purists, and you think that's a distortion of the true Bach, wait till you hear the next one, which is a transmogrification of the same fugue again, but on the much talked and written about Moog synthesizer. And here it comes now. Hello, Hal.
Somebody once described to me the sound of the Moog as very sad, and yet other people find it very cartoony and silly. So it really does come down to the options of what you've programmed it to do. The original intent of the Moog synthesizer was to take these very disparate kind of studio devices like filters and oscillator tone generators, processors, and things like that, and to combine a system that was unified and could talk to itself very quickly. And using that system, like building blocks or Legos, you build your instrument. A Moog synthesizer of the early days could be configured in any way you wanted to. You could use one piece of it, or you could use all of it, and you could repatch it in different ways. That's where the real power is. It's an open system, but it is a system designed to work together. The original system had a series of panels you see on the front, metal panels with jacks to plug in cables. It had switches and some kinds of knobs to control. And those are the settings. There are various ways to control the synthesizer itself, the keyboard being the most familiar to most people, but it's not required. The original intent was to create an instrument for experimental composers. Those were the people that were pushing the boundaries of sound. They didn't want to necessarily make violins or a replica of a trumpet. They were really trying to do things that no normal known instrument could do.
Synthesizer is a device that makes a whole something, a whole sound or a whole piece of music out of component parts. And that's the way a musician thinks of a synthesizer. As this part changes the tone color, this part is the pitches, this part is the articulation, and so on.
Robert Moog had been making theremins since he was a kid, starting with his father. Started a small business making customized theremins, which were really kind of an obsolete instrument from the late 20s, early 30s. In the 1950s, he was making these small runs of cool custom instruments for the few people that appreciated it. In the 60s, he started publishing articles that made it quite popular. People by the thousands were ordering his kits. And one of those people was a music teacher, Herb Deutsch. And Herb was at a music convention and saw the booth that said Moog and said, "That's the people that make my theremin." And he said, "Oh, there's the guy that did it." And they started becoming friends. And Herb asked him if he knew anything about experimental and modern experimental music. Bob Moog said, "I don't really know it." So Herb started taking him to concerts, playing him music, and said, "What I need is an instrument that can make sounds like this, that do wee-oo, and wow, and things that my normal instruments can't do." And so Bob said, "We could design that." And they got a small grant and spent some time together designing circuits. Bob was the electronics wizard, and he knew how to implement the ideas like wee-oo. How does that translate into a circuit? There was definitely a time when a keyboard player could be a leader. Stevie Wonder, Elton John, Keith Emerson, Rick Wakeman from Yes. The records that changed the world were Switched on Bach, Lucky Man. The Emerson, Lake and Palmer, especially being a touring group, showed the people what it looked like. And it was a featured part of their show, almost like a special effect. He would play music on it, but also do crazy tricks with it. And one of the more interesting tricks he would do was a linear controller, a piece of wood with a metal ribbon on it. He could control the synthesizer. Like we said, it could be controlled by almost anything. Instead of playing the keyboard, use the ribbon control, and he would run around in the audience with it. People thought, this is the future. This is now. This is what's happening. It's not the old music of the 60s.
There behind the glass stands a real big glass. Be careful as you
Some of the employees at the factory felt that they could sell more of the instruments if they weren't so expensive, the price of a car. And of course, that makes sense with any product. You sell more iPhones than you do Apple computers. To dumb it down, to simplify it, went against the grain of making the Rolls-Royce of instruments, but also it does appeal to more people, and it is just affordable. So by hopefully keeping the main sounds of it, they decided, what do most people do? 90% of the people make notes, they play melodies, they use one filter. It's a very simple setting, and we have maybe 2 or 3 oscillators to we don't need 10, but you could keep it to 3 and it would be the basic sound. So that cut all the costs out and kept a very simple instrument. And they created an instrument around 1970, 71 called the Mini Moog. The original users had just discovered this thing. It's like learning a computer. You're not an expert your first year or second year. You're just learning to use it. And somebody driving a car is not a Formula One racer until they've spent years and years with it. So most of the original records that came out were fairly primitive, even by their own standards. They were light years advanced to what other people might have done, but many of the original users were just learning their instrument for the first time. Imagine if I gave you a guitar and said, create a record. It's cool, but the Beatles and Wendy Carlos and people like that were creating their first recordings with the instrument. People invent a tool for one purpose. Sometimes people find another purpose for that. A motorcycle was not designed to jump through the air and do loops and tricks, and a bicycle was not designed for wheelies and all these other things, but we found uses for them, skateboards as well, that were never intended when they invented it.